Welcome, everyone. If you can grab your seat, whether you're here or whether you're home, if there's a seat nearby, or you're in car or in an airport, wherever you are, let us gather for the Berry Street essay. We want to say welcome to all of you who are joining us from all of the places. You are welcome. Welcome to all of you who traveled to Louisville, where we are gathered now to live stream our 2026 Berry Street essay. We're grateful for all of you. We're grateful to all of you for joining us. Grateful for the Berry Street Essay Committee and grateful for our essayists and our essayists. Grateful to the Reverend Sarah LaWall. And all of the contributors to today's essay. Grateful for the tradition for which we gather. Welcome. It is good to be here.
The Berry Street essayist is charged with bringing matters of importance forward for our collective consideration. This year's essayist is bringing forward deep reflection on lived experience in the hot, holy mess of ministry. Because that experience includes challenging stories of significant harm, we want to encourage you to reach out for community care during and after this essay if you need. Those of you attending online, you'll find details about ways you can access care in the chat. Those of you in person, our Care and Covenant team is available to you now. Later tonight, if you're attending General Assembly, the General Assembly chaplains will be available to you, all of whom are members of the UUMA. And I want to note that trans and non-binary people who might want to have supportive community to hear this essay, which includes stories of challenging harm, significant harm, have a couple of opportunities to gather in caucus groups to watch the essay later this summer. Those details will be posted online and they're available to any member of the UUMA. I also want to mention that the LGBTQ and multicultural ministry space is available after this essay as well. So lots of sources of support and community care. And now it is my pleasure to introduce to you the scribe of the Berry Street Essay Committee, the Reverend Connie Simon. Reverend Connie is an incredible, generous, deeply engaged leader in Unitarian Universalism. An accredited interim minister, Connie has served all across the country and in a variety of ministry contexts. Reverend Connie's current leadership includes co-chairing the UUA Transitions Review Task Force, co-chairing the UU Studies Network, serving on the Hope for Us conflict engagement team. She also has offered extensive leadership throughout her professional life, including to the Meadville Lombard Theological School of Board of Trustees, the UUA Bylaws Renewal Team, the Dictionary of Unitarian Universalist Biography, UU Leadership Schools, teaching, history, and it's impressive, isn't it? And writing for Worship Web, incredible contributions on Worship Web. And Connie was also a member for a full term on our UUMA Board of Trustees when I had the honor and privilege of working with you. You make such a tremendous contribution to our faith. We're so grateful to you, Connie, and we are all blessed by your leadership. So welcome as our scribe.
That sounded kind of good. It's like, who's she talking about? Greetings, dear colleagues. As you now know, I am the Reverend Connie Simon. I am a fat, brown-skinned, unapologetically Black woman with short salt and pepper hair and iridescent purple and teal glasses. and it is my honor to convene the 205th Ministerial Conference in Berry Street. It is a profound honor to serve as the scribe. I am aware of the weight of history this role carries. And on this Juneteenth in particular, aware of the fact that when the first Berry Street essay happened, Black folks like me weren't invited to participate. Indeed, most of my ancestors were enslaved. I am aware of how and why this conference began, aware of the dozens of extraordinary colleagues who have held the position of scribe before me. And then there's this. I just realized, the 47th scribe. Well, but wait a minute though. As I thought about it, I'm like, being 47 might not be that great. But still, I know, right? 205 years later, we are still gathering, still contending with white supremacy culture, with empire, with injustice, and with all the things. We are still showing up. Which means I need to pause here for something. Before we turn to the work of the conference, before we receive this year's essay and response, we need to stay here for a moment with us, with those of us gathered here. I've been listening to you while wearing many different hats in lots of different spaces. What I've seen over this year and the last several years and the last couple of days in particular is the truth of where so many of us are right now. Not the polished version we sometimes bring to collegial spaces, but the real thing. We are worried, not abstractly worried, genuinely keep you up at night worried about, as someone said, the precarity of ministry as a sustainable profession. Whether the work that we have given our lives to can continue to hold us. Whether our congregations can hold us. Whether the structures we serve in can hold us. We're trying to figure out how to hold activism and pastoral care at the same time, because in this moment, they are inseparable and also nearly impossible to carry together. Our people are being targeted. Their rights are being stripped. Their bodies are being legislated. And those people are also our people. We are not separate from the harm. What's happening in the world is happening to us too, as human beings, not just as ministers. We're angry. I'm just damn mad. It's the way I describe it. Righteously bone angry at what is being done to our trans siblings, our immigrant communities, our queer beloveds, and so many others with historically marginalized identities. And that it's often being done in the name of religion, no less, in the name of God. I'm tired too. Right? So many of us are just bone weary, tired, running on something that isn't even quite energy anymore. It's more like will and stubbornness, or maybe it's just love that refuses to quit even when the body is begging for rest. So I need to name all those things right here, right at the top of the conference, because it's true. And because this space, this Berry Street essay is one of the few places where we can say it out loud among colleagues who understand it without explanation. And yet, we keep going. Not because we figured out how to make it sustainable, not because the weight has gotten lighter, but because something in us will not let us stop. Our hearts, our minds, our conscience, our faith. That's not nothing, folks. That's actually extraordinary. The first ministers who met at Berry Street in 1820, sounds like so long ago, felt the weight of showing up for unpopular truths. They grappled with that delicate balance of challenging conscience while preserving relationship. They worked to hold their communities together even as they called society to transformation. They were dismissed as too intellectual, too optimistic about human nature, too willing to question what was supposed to be already set. We know a little something about that, don't we? What united those early ministers with us across 2 centuries is this: an unshakable faith in the human capacity for growth, in reason as a gift of the divine, and love as the thing that holds it all together. They did not retreat. Facing ridicule and resistance, they leaned into their calling, understanding that liberal religion is not a spectator sport. And with that, we light our chalice, this symbol we share. In this lighting, let us make a small act of resistance and renewal. Let us remind ourselves and one another why we are here, why we persist, and whose lives depend on us staying in this work together. It is our tradition that the outgoing member of the Berry Street Executive Committee offers our invocation. So please welcome Reverend Dr. Elizabeth Stevens.
My beloved colleagues, I am the Reverend Dr. Elizabeth Stevens, and it is an honor to be with you today, albeit virtually. I am a middle-aged white woman with blondish, wavy hair and glasses, and I'm wearing a flowered shirt. Will you pray with me? May we enter into this moment, this pause, this space in a way that prepares us to receive the gift of the Berry Street essay. May we know ourselves rooted in a tradition that goes back over 200 years, a tradition that has stretched and challenged and shaped our shared faith. May we prepare to open our minds to hear new stories, new perspectives, new ideas. May we remember that our tender hearts are also unimaginably resilient. Above all, may we know ourselves held, known and seen, understood in all of our flawed glory by the love that abides, the love that will never let us go. Amen, and blessed be.
It is another of our traditions that we invite someone with a special relationship to our essayist to offer a personalized introduction of them. Please welcome Nixon Matthews.
Hello, my name is Nixon Matthews. I use they, he pronouns. I am proudly trans. I am a white trans masculine person with short light brown hair. I have a beard I'm pretty proud of, and I'm wearing a blue shirt, a blue striped tie underneath a dark maroon plaid jacket, and I have a little rainbow pin on my lapel. Now, before we begin, I do want to offer a content warning. Sarah's essay speaks honestly about the harmful attacks and legislation targeting trans people, including transgender youth. It also references suicide. And for many of us who are trans or who love trans people, this might be hard to hear. So I invite you to care for yourselves and for each other. Now, I'm not going to introduce Sarah with the traditional introduction of titles, but I am honored to introduce Sarah as I know her, as someone I first met in the important work of advocacy, someone I have stood side by side in this fight, and someone I now count as a dear friend. But I have to admit, the first time we met, it was a bit rocky. I first met Sarah at an ACLU of Idaho event, and she was introduced to me as Reverend Sarah Lawal. And the moment I heard Reverend, I hate to admit, I immediately became suspicious. And so that first conversation, I said very directly and almost immediately, I am not a religious person and I never will be. It was an oddly intense first meeting. You know, like a lot of queer and trans people, I carry and experience religious harm. My queer identity was not accepted in my religious past. At best, it was tolerated. At worst, I was led to believe there is no greater shame. But that is very different from what I've come to know of Sarah and of her ministry, particularly as I witnessed her actions. You see, for years, I have been involved in advocacy work within Idaho's LGBTQ community, and I began to notice something about Sarah. When I was there, she was there. When I was on Zoom calls helping to prepare people to testify against cruel legislation, Sarah was there. When I was at the State House fighting bills that take from trans people, queer people, and our immigrant community, Sarah was there. When community was scared, exhausted, furious, and grieving, Sarah was there full of love and care. When I was there, when our community was there, Sarah was there in this work of fighting against the Christian nationalism that has taken hold in Idaho, and that matters. Now, as the title of Sarah's essay states, hers is indeed a ministry in a hot, holy mess, but it is more than that. Sarah is love with sleeves rolled up. She is religious garb in trans and queer colors. She is presence when presence costs something. And it is hope. She offers hope that does not pretend that things will magically work out fine. And she is a person of faith who chooses again and again to stand where the harm is happening and to say, not in my name, not in the name of my traditions, and not in the name of anything that claims to be good or holy. So as you will soon hear, Sarah's essay reminds us that Idaho, as we know it today, did not come out of nowhere. The white supremacy, Christian nationalism, and the anti-LGBTQ and anti-immigrant legislation we are facing now are part of a long and ugly history. But she also reminds us of something so deeply important, that there is another story being written here too. A story of people showing up, of radical love, and of people speaking their truths and fighting like hell. I'm still not a religious person today. My fear of Sarah trying to convert me never happened because she never tried. She just offered absolute acceptance and care. But I'll say this, if ministry means building lifelines from the front lines of a red state, then I have seen Sarah's ministry. I have seen it in her again and again. And so with that, it is my deepest honor to introduce my dear friend, my co-conspirator, and today's Berry Street essayist, the Reverend Sarah Lawal.
Thank you, Nixon. It is an honor to know you and be your friend. Beloved colleagues, Never in a million years, when I started my journey toward ministry as a brand new half-time director of religious education in Pasadena, California, pregnant with my first baby, desperate for a job, convinced they wouldn't hire me if they knew I was pregnant, never did I imagine I would be standing here before all of you as your very straight essayist. Thank you for this honor and invitation. For a visual introduction, I am a middle-aged white woman with ear-length wavy brown hair and glasses, wearing a blue and white floral dress. I want to be real with you, colleagues. I want this Berry Street essay to offer up some shared affirmation of how hard ministry really is, especially in these times of crumbling democracy, rising fascism, and a world on fire. Not to mention the complicated, painful, beautiful messiness of regular life. So I will share my first confession with you. Imposter syndrome is real. When I look out at all of you and think of those of you who are watching online, so many of you dear friends and wise mentors, and some of you celebrities whose ministries I have admired from afar and tried to emulate, it's hard to shut out the voices wondering, why me? Who am I to give this lecture? What do I possibly have to offer? I hope what I have to offer is something of an unvarnished truth of the beautiful struggle that is this vocation, especially in hostile states like mine. And that declaration feels just a little bit vulnerable and scary, especially for an Enneagram 3 like me, who really wants you to think I've got my shit together and I know what I'm doing. But I don't always have it together. I don't always know what I'm doing. And I persist anyway, because I cannot comprehend an alternative. And because something in me, despite all the evidence to the contrary, believes this world needs us in this moment. This world needs Unitarian Universalism. Our theology, our radical welcome, our people and our ministries, our orientation toward justice, and our love at the center. And the only way we can keep meeting this moment is by staying together in our collective pursuit of what process theologians describe as relentless love, by deepening our collegiality, by taking care of one another, by sharing our unvarnished truths and vulnerable selves in this work to bolster our fortitude as we keep showing up to this broken and hurting world. Because I believe it is through our vulnerability, much more so than through our accomplishments and accolades, that our ministries grow and thrive and our collegial connections become part of that universal love and salvation rooted in our theology. So I'm going to be real with you about my own life and experience of ministry in the hot, holy mess. As many of you know, I minister in the hot, holy mess that is the state of Idaho. Idaho is unfortunately too well known for its conservative red state Christian nationalist politics. We're right up there with Texas, Florida, Tennessee, Kansas, followed closely by Alabama, Missouri, Louisiana. I know there are more. So before I get into the thick of it, could we just take a moment to show some love for our colleagues working in red states? Colleagues, if you are here, would you wave your hands? If you're on Zoom, give us a hallelujah hands emoji so we can shower you with our love. I have been in Idaho for 11 years, and year after year has gotten exponentially worse, particularly when it comes to attacks on our queer and especially our trans beloveds. Idaho has seen over 30 anti-LGBTQ plus bills introduced in our state house since 2020. Buoyed by this current federal administration, this year has by far been the worst. During this year's session, our Idaho State Legislature passed one of the most heinous, restrictive bathroom bills in the country. This bill criminalizes a trans person for using a bathroom that aligns with their gender identity and provides outrageous penalties. including jail time and fines. More jail time than any other first-time misdemeanor, all for going to the bathroom. Thankfully, this week, an Idaho federal court judge issued a preliminary injunction on this law while the lawsuit brought by the ACLU and Lambda Legal proceeds. Our governor signed this bathroom bill into law this year on the evening of Trans Day of Visibility, an act we only describe as cruelty for cruelty's sake, a vindictive stab in the back to our trans community. You see, we had started the morning gathered together, community members, organizers, advocates, and faith leaders, to watch our mayor and Boise City Council members ceremoniously lower their pride flag outside City Hall because our governor had just signed a flag ban bill. A bill that penalized any public institution that flies a flag other than the US flag, the state flag, and an official flag of a city or municipality, with fines of up to $2,000 a day. This was year 2 of this battle, and the legislature's attempt to target and silence the city of Boise for flying the pride flag, which has flown for more than a decade. So there we were at City Hall on Transgender Day of Visibility, watching the pride flag come down so the city wouldn't incur excessive penalties. Later that afternoon, before the rally, our mayor and city council read a proclamation specifically drafted for Transgender Day of Visibility, and they presented a framed copy to 3 trans-led organizations in the state. There were many tears. The mayor cried, city council members cried, I cried all morning. Then as it got dark that night, City Hall was lit up in the trans flag colors in solidarity with community. After our legislature blessedly shut itself down for the year, the city of Boise then wrapped its flagpoles in the Progress Pride flag pattern and colors in an act of malicious compliance. Perhaps you saw the national headlines. The fact that my city is actively pushing against the hate and working to help LGBTQ+ people feel safe and welcome is commendable, because it is a Sisyphean endeavor, and yet it is so very needed, especially at a time when our trans beloveds and their families are targets of our state and federal government and terrified for their futures. We try to honor every silver lining, every ray of hope, every victory, no matter how small. But this is what our legislature spent its time on this year, roughly 0.5% of our population. They also targeted undocumented immigrants, the medically vulnerable, the houseless, the disabled, the poor, all while doing very little to address the real life needs and concerns of Idahoans. But before I continue with the hot, holy mess and challenges of ministry in my state today, I want to go back in time a little bit and set the stage for how we got here. It's no secret that my state of Idaho has the particular distinction of being a haven for white supremacists in the post-civil rights era. Not unlike what we see happening today Angry white nationalists who were fleeing integration and diversity landed in rural northern Idaho and bought up swaths of land to build compounds of hate and proclaim a white homeland. This bastion of bigotry began in earnest in the 1970s when Richard Butler purchased 20 acres in North Idaho, the ancestral lands of the Coeur d'Alene tribe, who call themselves the Skitswish. There he established his own Christian posse comitatus, or power of the country, and crowned himself marshal. Shortly thereafter, Butler anointed himself the spiritual leader of a new church plant he called the Church of Christ Christian, whose political arm became known as the Aryan Nations. For years, they hosted the Aryan World Congress, which became the hottest event for white supremacists, neo-Nazis, and KKK worldwide, attracting the who's who of fascism as far away as Germany, Italy, and South Africa. The Aryan Nations groomed Richard Weaver, the man whose attempted arrest in 1991 sparked the Ruby Ridge standoff. You might remember that Ruby Ridge was an 11-day siege between the FBI and the Weaver family. The standoff ended in the deaths of Weaver's son, wife, and a federal marshal. The Aryan Nations were also responsible for general public threats, public marches, and countless bombings wreaking all kinds of destruction and fueling hate in the years they were active. In 1986, the Aryan Nations orchestrated a series of pipe bombs in the city of Coeur d'Alene, including at the home of a Catholic priest who was the founder of the Kootenai County Task Force on Human Relations. It is worth noting, as a point of inspiration and remembering that each act of resistance matters then and now, that the Aryan Nations went bankrupt after a civil lawsuit awarding a multi-million-dollar settlement to a family who was attacked and shot at by Aryan Nation guards when they drove past the compound and their car backfired. The lawsuit crippled the organization. In a beautiful twist of fate, though I'm sure it was much more tactically organized than mere fate, the Spokesman Review reported that the Aryan Nations compound was purchased at an auction by the family who was attacked, and they sold it to a multi-millionaire human rights activist who turned it into a training ground for firefighters, burning the buildings as part of a training exercise. And even as those white supremacist leaders have died and compounds like that have been raided and dismantled, every few years, Idaho continues to make national headlines for leading, promoting, or being connected to some kind of fascist Christian nationalist action. From those who promoted the Charlottesville Unite the Right rally who now reside in Idaho, to those who not only participated in, but organized and championed the January 6th Capitol riot, to a truck full of Patriot Front members from several states attempting to cause harm and violence at a family-centered pride festival in Coeur d'Alene, to the racist harassment of the University of Utah women's basketball team at the hotel where they were staying during the 2024 NCAA championship. Today in Idaho and in red states across the country, the Christian posse comitatus still exists under the guise of conservative Christianity, of, quote, deeply held religious convictions, which we now name as Christian nationalism. Instead of buying up swaths of rural forest land and farmland in far North Idaho, they are buying up small businesses in the middle of a small, cozy town, Moscow, Idaho, home to the University of Idaho. Christ Church, as it's known today, perhaps you've heard of it, began in Moscow in 1998, but its senior pastor, Doug Wilson, began his career in smaller churches in the area in the late 70s, not long after Richard Butler bought his land up further north. Religious News Service reports that Wilson garnered national attention in 2003 when community members exposed some of his earlier writing in which he argued that chattel slavery, besides being allowed for in the Bible, was not as harsh in the antebellum South as commonly portrayed. But Wilson's real rise to national infamy came during the pandemic, when he led maskless protests and gatherings at Moscow City Hall, defying public health orders and calling it civil disobedience. Doug Wilson and leaders of Christ Church have capitalized on their newfound conservative popularity, initiating a laser-focused, strategic, theologically justified, albeit questionable, campaign to take over the city. They actively encourage and financially support church members to buy up local real estate along Moscow's Main Street corridor, and now own restaurants, coffee shops, a brewery, and more. Some reports estimate Christ Church and its members own nearly 20% of downtown businesses. And that's not all. Doug Wilson and the Christ Church empire also includes 5 satellite campuses, most recently adding one in Washington, D.C., its own publishing house, Canon Press, its own Logos school system and curriculum development, and new St. Andrew's College. Christ Church is part of the Communion of Reformed Evangelical Churches, a denomination started by Doug Wilson himself, which now claims approximately 160 plus evangelical churches spread across the globe. Moscow, Idaho has become a proving ground, or maybe a battleground is more accurate, for their mission to remake the city and ultimately this country into a Christian theocracy. Doug Wilson himself refers to this mission as a civil war. Just this past February, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, who attends one of Wilson's churches in Tennessee, invited him to lead a worship service at the Pentagon. In their spoils of war, patriarchy, white supremacy, American exceptionalism, and conservative Christianity rule the land. Their worldview provides no legal standing for LGBT people at all, and trans people simply do not exist. No voting rights for women. They like to use the euphemism of household voting, one vote per household, where the man is the godhead of the household. So you do the math. And in their world, only white Christian men would hold public office. In 2022, in an interview on NBC News, our colleague who gave the prayer, the Reverend Dr. Elizabeth Stevens, who has served the UU Church of the Palouse in Moscow, Idaho for 16 years, the same stomping grounds as Doug Wilson's Christ Church, accurately described the church in these words. Let's listen.
You consider Christ Church a church?
I don't.
Really?
I really don't.
What is it then?
I see it as a dominionist cult.
Nowhere is this Christian nationalism and dominionist cult theology more public than in our state legislature. As their attacks on all the values we hold dear and on the very dignity of large swaths of humanity grow, as we face down the thinly veiled threat to remake Idaho into a Christian nation, I have found myself describing doing ministry in Idaho as ministry behind enemy lines. And I really don't love that language for so many reasons, not the least of which is because they call themselves warriors for Christ, but also because as someone who holds the values of peace and nonviolence close and serving a faith tradition that also deeply reveres those same values, I've worked hard over the years to purge my vocabulary of violent language and war metaphors. And also, because we have violent wars and genocides raging across the globe, with millions of lives sacrificed by governments behaving much like ours, declaring their particular supremacies and attempting to keep a tight hold on their power and wealth. But let's be honest, they have so eagerly adopted the language of war and declared war against us. As one conservative radio host told Trump in a 2020 broadcast, "I'd be happy to die in this fight. This is a fight for everything. God is with us." So when state agents are gunning people down in the street, when colleagues are checking in about their witness at the Broadview or Delaney detention centers saying words like, "Well, they've stopped using chemical munitions for the moment," what else do we call? On our battlefield in Idaho, we have experienced a barrage of attacks on our trans and queer communities, even prior to COVID. Attacks on the drag community, immigrant community, BIPOC communities, pregnant people, healthcare professionals, those who identify as women, attacks on libraries and schools, teachers, progressive religious communities, and non-Christian faith communities, and the list goes on and on. Before the atrocities of this current legislative session, which I described earlier, the banning of flags and criminalizing trans folks, Idaho had already wiped out reproductive care and access to abortion. Legislators passed bills criminalizing healthcare providers, subjecting them to prison, fines, and loss of their license. They passed a bounty hunter law, much like Texas, that allows anyone related to a pregnant person who has an abortion to file a civil suit against that person and their doctor up to 4 years after the procedure and receive damages of up to $20,000. In 2020, Idaho was the first state in the nation to ban transgender girls from participating in school sports. In 2023, they banned healthcare for trans youth and trans folks on Medicaid. They banned the use of preferred names and pronouns in schools and public institutions. They banned transgender youth from using the bathrooms in school which align with their gender identity. They passed a bill that allows children or parents to file a legal claim against any public or school library if they obtain materials deemed harmful to minors, a bill which applies to our church libraries open to the public. They passed a bill with strict prohibitions on teaching about LGBTQ+ themes, individuals, historical figures, even in age-appropriate historical contexts. In an equal attack on immigrants, they proposed bills that require the use of E-Verify by all large employers, mandated 287G agreements in all law enforcement institutions across the state, and required public schools, universities, and hospitals to collect and report the immigration status and nationality of students and patients to the state. And this year, in one of the last bills that was signed into law in a final hit on the trans community, was grossly titled the Pediatric Secretive Transitions Parental Rights Act, a bill that attempts to solve the mythical problem of schools, quote, secretly turning kids transgender, but which essentially requires school officials and teachers to forcibly out queer students to their parents. Oh, and this is the second year in a row they have passed a memorial resolution denouncing same-sex marriage and requesting the Supreme Court overturn Obergefell. I'll stop there. It's a lot. To tell you of all of the horrors would take up the entirety of this lecture. Suffice it to say, this is merely a sampling of the attacks they are waging in their Christian nationalist war. And every year feels worse than the last with the battlefield widened. In Idaho, we often remind ourselves that we have been living under rising Christian nationalism and the policies of Project 2025 for years. Idaho has long been a proving ground, seeding and growing this particular brand of Christian nationalism. We are now watching sweep our nation and federal government, evidenced by the fact that our president has designated the trans community and its allies as one of the most concerning terrorist threats to this country, and detailed a counterterrorism strategy ending with the words, "We will find you and we will kill you." So perhaps you can understand why I've succumbed to the language. They are the only words that describes what it feels like to live under the oppressive thumb of Idaho's state government and be subjected to their constant assaults. It sometimes feels like we progressives, we radicals, Unitarians, regular people, especially BIPOC and queer folks, have been dropped behind enemy lines. Some of us are digging trenches and strongholds from which we can fight back, and others are laying low, keeping their heads down, leaning on supportive community and mutual aid, taking it one day at a time. We're all learning how to embody and employ Deepa Iyer's ecosystem of social change, each of us taking a role in the fight, all of us just trying to survive and help each other make it through to some kind of safety and refuge. And we're watching in solidarity with many of you being forced to do the same. It's overwhelming and exhausting. And yet, like so many of you, we persist, positioning our churches and our ministries in any way we can to fight back, to help heal the wounded, to care for community and protect those in harm's way. Given the onslaught of attacks, it often feels like we're not doing enough. It's hard not to feel like anything is enough in this moment. But when I sit down and really think about it and I make a list, it turns out we've been doing more than I realized and doing it for a long time. And I know that's true for you too. Here are some of the ways my community has shown up and responded to meet this moment. In 2019, we sponsored an asylum seeker, a queer man and his family, as they continue to forge their way through our broken system toward hopeful citizenship. That's a picture of the real Mel. We've supported 2 other immigrant families who found themselves targets of the system this past year with housing, food, financial support, and more. We've hosted countless panel discussions on the impact of Idaho's abortion ban and produced abortion storytelling stage productions telling the real-life Idaho stories of those who have had abortions and the providers who desperately want to care for them. We started a support group for parents of trans and gender expansive kids, providing a safe hangout space for the kids too. And just a few weeks ago, one of those silver lining moments, one of our members put together a makeup tutorial party for our trans kids and parents with the help of our local Aveda salon. Just before the 2024 election, I became the new host for the Mama Dragons podcast, interviewing some of the most wonderful guests doing extraordinary work in and with our queer community. And the best part is, I get to bring some of our amazing Unitarian Universalists on the show. We've partnered with countless trans-led organizations to host paperwork parties and trans joy cafes and community care during the legislative session, a community brunch featuring the Beacon Press Common Read Authentic Selves, and sponsored the first ever trans march with several other faith communities. We've held drag church and drag shows and banned book communion services. And we've shown up in the legislature year after year, advocating, singing, praying, protesting. And this year, 9 of us were arrested in a sit-in in the governor's office. I'll share more of that story in a little bit. In 2023, when the healthcare ban for trans youth was moving through the legislature, I joined a massive coalition advocacy effort. I spent every week in committee hearings, legislators' offices, even a meeting with the governor's highest staff members. I helped organize and promote community education events and forums, anything I could think of. Many of you know that I am the proud mama of a transgender daughter who came out during the pandemic. And while there is no doubt in my mind I would have been part of this fight against these attacks on the trans community regardless, it has, of course, felt very personal to me. I sat in Republican legislators' offices, telling them my child's story, begging them to understand that this healthcare is life-saving, asking them, wouldn't you move heaven and earth to save your child's life? There was one senator, a mother herself, who tried to placate me by saying she could see that we both loved our children. We just disagreed about how to protect them. I wanted to believe her, except her version of protecting children would send me and my child's doctor to jail. Our state, and now our federal government, is systematically trying to erase trans folks from public life. It is bleak, my friends. And this is the growing reality for all of us. This is our collective future under fascism. This January, just a couple of weeks after our legislative session began, when the nation's attention was on Minneapolis, one of the high school students who attended with her mom our support group that we host for parents and caregivers of trans kids died by suicide. Her name is May. Because of the healthcare ban, May and her mom had been traveling to Portland every 6 months, an 8-hour drive, for her gender-affirming care and hormone prescription. She'd signed on as a plaintiff in a lawsuit contesting the school bathroom ban from last year. That lawsuit was just dismissed last month because May had been the last remaining eligible plaintiff. Our Attorney General celebrated the dismissal as a victory for Idaho families and students. May was brave and smart and funny, and like all our kids, loved video games and anime. And there is no doubt in our minds that her death was a direct result of the constant attack on trans folks, especially our youth, by our state government, and the climate of hate fueled by their laws and their religion. I learned the news of May's death during our UU Ministers Association Center Institute, and it nearly broke me. I'm deeply grateful to those beloved colleagues who offered me some of the most tender, compassionate pastoral care I didn't know I needed. That stunning worship service on grief and gratitude, when I sat while my tears poured forth and a colleague sitting next to me laid hands on me, having no idea what was up. After that service, colleagues joined me as I poured my grief into constructing that beautiful grief altar, all while pausing to field calls from funeral homes back home in effort to extract official verbal commitment that they would take care of this family and treat May with the utmost respect so I could recommend them in good faith. You, my beloved colleagues, have been such a lifeline to me in so many large and small ways. I will admit to you that I have felt deep waves of hopelessness for a few years now. On more than one occasion, I have confessed to my congregation that I have felt like I have no hope to offer. I, a minister, have no hope to offer. That feels pretty bleak and a little bit concerning, because I do believe that part of our job, part of this calling, is to help us all find the hope, see the hope, hold on to hope I have a beautiful hand-lettered sign in my office that says those very words, hold on to hope. But in this ongoing war on freedom and basic human rights and dignity, on love and peace, hope feels impossible and frankly a little bit naive. Like if we let ourselves hope, we're just setting ourselves up for disappointment. Have any of you felt like this recently? Maybe. Just want to know that I'm not out here on my no hope limb all alone. In the midst of my growing hopelessness and desperation, I began ramping up my public ministry, which means in addition to ramping up the community support and advocacy, I also took to social media, sharing and sometimes screaming into the void. Before then, I used to worry about virtue signaling or performative justice, feeling that I would be called out, mostly afraid of being called out by colleagues, because that was happening a lot. But I was so angry at what was happening in my state and that it was happening under the cover of deeply held religious beliefs that I just stopped caring. I needed people in my state and some in my extended family to know that there were loving, safe, affirming religious communities and parents and leaders who would fight for our queer and trans beloveds. People who believed with the deepest theological and moral conviction that their lives and bodies and existence are sacred and beautiful and needed in this world. After my daughter was the target of a verbal but very violent threat at school for wearing a skirt, I realized that unless my fellow allies, parents, ministers, and I advertised our convictions publicly, out loud, with all the possible signals available to us, few would know we were in their camp because we're so often overshadowed and drowned out by the extremist religious hate. So that was when I started adorning myself, my bags, my water bottle, my car, with all the trans rights, pride, DEI, and repro justice slogan, t-shirts, stickers, bracelets, pins. If my legislators were going to waste their time banning the pride flag and stripping away rights, I was going to make damn sure people knew which side of the battle I was on. I've noticed that the longer I live in Idaho, the more inured I become to the politics, even as I rail against them. It isn't until I experience the reactions of others, mostly from those in blue states, that I remember just how terrible and sometimes isolating it is to live there. My closest colleague is 4 hours away. And being on the Utah border, we are not part of the same UUMA chapter. I have good, progressive, interfaith colleagues in Boise, but you know, it isn't quite the same as being with your tribe. But here's the thing. Here's the vulnerability it's taken me some 3,000 words to get to. The public ministry we see of each other, whether in the national media or on social media or in our UU world, even in our large collegial gatherings, is but a fraction of the real life, hot, holy mess of ministry that few of us get to see. You see, since COVID hit, which was a derailment for all of us, behind the scenes of my posts and public ministry, my life was falling apart. I was falling apart. And this is the truth of ministry we so rarely witness, let alone talk about. In the summer of 2020, my husband was diagnosed with rapid onset arthritis, which we now think was activated by COVID before we really knew what that was. That fall, our eldest child came out as trans, and we began the process of supporting her through her transition, which actually became the bright ray of hope in the whole mess, although it is full of doctor's appointments. The following summer, I was diagnosed with breast cancer that came with learning I carried the BRCA2 gene, which then led to 3 surgeries in 9 months. My marriage struggled under the weight of all this, and I became depressed. So I went on antidepressants for the first time. My home life had become a hot, holy mess too. Perhaps some of you know that feeling. It felt like my whole world just kept caving in, and every time I saw a ray of light, and I thought I might be able to dig my way out, more rubble would just pile up. And it felt like I would never find my way out or beyond this constant compounding pain and despair in my personal life, let alone our collective political life. I was fortunate enough to be able to take a sabbatical in the spring of 2022, which I delayed because of COVID. And I ended those 5 months with my final surgery. I had such high hopes for my sabbatical. Such gauzy dreams for how it would look and feel and all that I would accomplish. But because things had gone a bit sideways in my life between the personal challenges and health crises stacking up, the weight of it all becoming unbearable, I thought a sabbatical, especially one as long as mine, would magically solve all my problems. I thought, surely in 5 months, I will find my joy again. Surely I will heal my relationships with my people and my body. Surely I will get the rest I crave and feel rejuvenated and restored and ready to conquer anything. Needless to say, I did not return from sabbatical refreshed and restored. As one of you who also took a delayed sabbatical in the post-COVID emergence described, my tank was not refilled at all. It had been so far beyond empty that all I could manage was to get back to zero. I'd been so depleted and was still in the midst of major shockwaves to my life and my system. Feeling fully restored seemed impossible. And as one congregant reflected to me, you can't take a sabbatical from life. I certainly learned that firsthand. But thanks to your wise counsel, I was able to count coming back to zero as a success. So when my state began ramping up its attacks on trans folks, I was already at the lowest point I had ever been in my life experience. And I channeled all that angst and pain and rage and frustration and fear and uncertainty into my advocacy. And I'm not sure that was the healthiest choice. I am exhausted. My body and spirit have been depleted again, like so many of us. But at the same time, even now, I am fueled by that stubbornness, by that unknown energy that says, what is the alternative? But you, my colleagues, have offered me such care and love. You became lifelines without knowing it. I think back to that beautiful keynote during Institute when our speaker, Kai Cheng Tom, said, we are all shade for someone else. We are a tree that someone else is resting under, and we might not even know it. I felt my heart crack open as I was experiencing that in real time and remembered all the shade my colleagues had offered me over the years. In early 2020, I was invited to join a study group that met in California. Now, I know that study groups carry some kind of mythical, elevated status among us, but what I've learned is that these groups were formed by colleagues who wanted to study with other colleagues in their geographic area back in the days when ministerial professional development and study specific to UU theology and practice was not so widely available. So any of us can start our own study group. Still, I'd heard the mythical stories of these powerhouse collegial groups while I was in seminary, and I was skeptical, mostly because I could not fathom writing any more papers. I thought I had finally completed my academic run after my MDiv. But I was assured that this was a chill group who were supportive and flexible, and I need not worry about outsized expectations. What I experienced instantly was a group of colleagues so welcoming, so kind, so supportive of each other, so genuinely curious about each other's ministry, so willing to listen to me, receive me, and bring me into their care just as my life began unraveling. And how much that care meant to me and would buoy me in the years to come, even though we only meet once a year. In their gentle company, I learned of the research done on the relative happiness in one's lifespan, and that as it turns out, the midlife crisis is a real thing because the experience of happiness or contentment over the lifetime is shaped like an inverse bell curve, like a U. And statistically, we middle-aged folks often find that the greatest hardships and challenges in life are not when your kids are toddlers, if you're a parent, but rather when you are squarely middle-aged. I was stuck at the bottom of the U. This was a shared experience for many, apparently, and although it sucked, I felt seen and validated, and dare I say, the tiniest bit hopeful that eventually I would slowly make my way to the other side. Bless you, my study group colleagues, for introducing me to the U shape of life. The shade you have provided, colleagues, is so real and so needed, even if you don't see it. From art boxes delivered in the mail to offers of respite and guest rooms, even a lake house, to gift cards and surprise texts and notes to virtual teas and happy hours. From invitations to be part of incredible collaborative ministry projects like the Uplift Collective and Glitter Blessed and Pink Haven Coalition, projects which not only introduced me to some extraordinary colleagues whom I'd only known by reputation, but now call friends, but also mended my aching, broken heart and kept that fire burning in me and my ministries in ways I cannot begin to describe. To the simple, playful moments of resting in your shade, like late night talks with Institute roommates and GA dinners, collective online shopping for outfits to wear to this very street lecture, and being directed, of course, to immediately binge all of Heated Rival. Shout out to my colleagues for that recommendation. And it wasn't just individual colleagues, but also your communities, particularly those in blue states, offering support for the work in Idaho. The director of social justice and the reproductive justice team at First Unitarian Portland raised more than $4,000 for Idaho interfaith organizing for reproductive freedom. My former home church, Neighborhood UU Church of Pasadena, made an Idaho trans rights organization a recipient of their Share the Plate program, raising over $1,500. And colleagues, I know you too are ministering in your own hot, holy messes. And despite that, you have shared yourselves, your ministries, your words with us on social media and in Substacks, in ministry days and GA lectures and worship services, which I have turned to on countless Sundays when I have felt bereft and lost and exhausted. You have helped me feel connected to this faith in ways I could not have anticipated. Truly, so many of you are doing some powerful, incredible ministry to meet this moment. And when I read about it online or in UU World, I am inspired and bolstered. And sometimes I also succumb to that unhelpful tendency to compare and despair. Because here's another confession, colleagues. While I am very proud of the ministry I have led, I constantly fight against the poisonous thoughts that it is not enough, that I am not doing enough. Because when I look at your ministries, I can't help but think, oh, I'm not doing that or doing that or doing it like that. If I were out there listening to this very street essay, I might leave here feeling inspired, but a little overwhelmed and daunted, maybe a little discouraged because my ministry doesn't look like the person standing up here speaking to us. Stop that. Please hear me when I tell you to trust the ministry you are doing right now, even if you think it's not very much because you too find yourself at the bottom of the U. Your ministry is enough. You are enough. Together, we are more than enough. We are a force. And it is through that force of togetherness, of collegial connection and care that we will feed and grow that relentless love that we need to keep meeting this moment. I do want to name the painful truth, however, that not all of us have received the relentless love and shimmering shade of good collegiality. Some of us feel so isolated and alone and overwhelmed and exhausted. We don't know how to cultivate that kind of collegiality. And perhaps sometimes it feels like another thing we just don't have time for. And some of us have been deeply hurt and spurned and harmed by colleagues. I am so sorry. You deserve better. We should be better. And even as I wrote this part of the essay, because I wanted to lift up the value and power of collegiality, I also remembered the 100 moments when I missed the mark. And I didn't respond to that email or text or reach out when one of you was struggling. I could certainly be better at it. Because if our theology is grounded in love, with love at the center of all we do, then our commitment to relentless love also needs to extend to one another. We need to keep building and growing communities of care within ministry and beyond. We need to show up to chapter gatherings and collegial spaces and calls for public witness and direct action. We need to reach out for help anytime we could use some support before things totally collapse. And we need to mentor the next generation of ministers. Because of the examples many of you have set, because so many of you showed up and reached out and took on the mantle of leadership, because of the courage and leadership in your organizing, advocacy, and direct action so many of you have shown and shared with me over the years, I had the skills and the courage to help lead planned civil disobedience at our state house this April. On April 1st of this year, the day after Idaho's governor signed that horrible bathroom bill into law on Trans Day of Visibility, a group of us, community members, leaders, people of faith, staged a sit-in in our governor's office. We'd already been holding weekly interfaith actions since the legislative session began, bringing a faithful presence willing to challenge the harmful Christian nationalist theology and political idolatry. We'd held worship services, prayer vigils, scripture read-ins. We did some guerrilla scripturing, leaving scriptures all along the Capitol. Hymn sings and storytelling, a mass disruption in our rotunda, all to try and communicate in a public way that love of neighbor is not optional and laws that cause harm do not reflect our faith. On the day of our final weekly action nearing the close of the legislative session, after a prayer walk through the building, we entered the governor's office and took up space. We sat down, we wrote notes, and we waited. We planted our bodies, prepared to stay as long as it took to see the governor. But he did not meet with us. In fact, we learned later that he snuck out early. Once the 5 o'clock hour came and the office officially closed, 9 of us were arrested for misdemeanor trespassing and failure to depart. We'd planned for this moment. What we didn't fully anticipate were the masses of community members and clergy that stayed and held space in the hallway outside the governor's office. They stayed and witnessed. They sang and read blessings and prayed. Others joined them as the day went on. They stayed with us, singing songs from the singing resistance movement for 5.5 hours.
It's okay to feel that bill.
Sometimes we would sing along. Sometimes we just sat. It was a profound and powerful experience that honored the thread of love and connection we'd started in those weekly actions and the prayer walk that began that day's action. Even as we were being handcuffed and cited, and the supporters in the hallway could no longer see us through the small windows in the office door, they kept singing. They sang, "No one is getting left behind this time. Every one of these people are ours. We belong to them and they belong to us. And our love for each other will carry us through." They sang, and we heard every word. 9 of us were arrested. 3 trans folks, including community advocate Nixon Matthews, who introduced me. 3 grandmothers, a young adult, another mom of a trans person, and me. 5 of the 9 of us were Unitarian Universalists.
Please, out. Move, please. Hope in prayer. Sorry. Trans rights are human rights. Hope in prayer. We're right here. In hope, in prayer. We find ourselves here. This is nothing compared to what they've done to trans people. We're right here. In
Five of the 9 of us were UUs from my congregation, and many more Unitarian Universalists joined the supporters in the hallway and later at the jail when we were released, cheering, offering hugs and water and snacks, and their relentless love. It was a heart-wrenching, emotional experience made possible by so many supporters, advocates, and organizers, and one I will never forget. Many of you know that being arrested in community with other activists is quite a bonding experience like no other. The 9 of us now share this powerful connection that makes us know deep in our bones that we have each other's backs, no matter what, and we always will. And we know now, we also know that we are never alone because we have experienced a community who will stay with us no matter what, whatever it takes. If anything, what organizing, activism, and ministry behind enemy lines has taught me, especially in this last year, is that wherever and whenever community shows up, there is hope. There is a depth of care. There is relentless love. The greatest gift in this battle amidst the anger and despair has been the people in it with me. The community is more deeply connected to one another than ever before, and I have made some beautiful, unexpected friendships in advocates and organizers like Nixon. That old adage from community organizing, "We take care of us," that is the fuel helping me hold on to hope. And you, colleagues, you are also a part of that fuel. You hold the vision when some of us cannot. You cast the vision when some of us are too tired to even lift our heads and try, when our fear and exhaustion clouds our ability to see a future of hope and thriving. When we remember the beauty and power and depth of love that shows up when community comes together, any community, this one, the advocacy circles back home, our congregations or patients or inmates, we can find the hope and resolve to keep going, keep fighting, keep teaching, keep resisting and getting arrested and caring for each other, and keep building the movement for collective liberation. Together, we make a wonderful weapon in this fight. And I know it sounds weird to call us a weapon, but in keeping with the war metaphor, this faith, this community of ministry has fortified me and my congregation in ways I could have never imagined. It reminds us that we are part of something larger than ourselves, part of a larger community of faith whose arsenal is love and justice and joy and connection. A battalion whose battle cry is trans rights are human rights. No human being is illegal. Bodily autonomy is a sacred right, and every body is sacred. Abortion is healthcare. Black lives still matter. No one is getting left behind. Our love, our relentless love for each other will carry us through. Bless you, my colleagues. May it always be so.
Thank you to Sarah for a wonderful essay. Thank you for your courage, your commitment, your fierce resistance, and your willingness to stick with it even in this hot, holy mess. I now welcome our respondent, the Reverend Jamie Yandel, Transgender Support Specialist in the Office of the Vice President for Programs and Ministries at the UUA.
Thank you for your Berry Street essay, Reverend Sarah. Truly. A colleague asked me recently, how can we best support trans people right now? And I told them, go talk to Reverend Sarah Lawal, because there's just not one way we're all going to get free. There have to be many paths, many strategies, many forms of care and resistance happening all at once. And we need every single one of those methods operating in unison to get through these dismal times. And I think your essay, Rev Sarah, understands that deeply, and your ministry is changing the world. And I am honored and privileged to provide the response to your Berry Street essay today. My name is Reverend Jamie Yandel. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a board-certified chaplain and the transgender support specialist for the Unitarian Universalist Association. I have red hair and blue eyes and pale skin. I'm wearing a black shirt and a striped cardigan underneath. My background is trees against water. My work centers spiritual care, advocacy, community building, and creating networks of belonging and resilience for transgender, non-binary, intersex, two-spirit, gender-expansive, gender-blessed, genderqueer people and their beloveds within and beyond Unitarian Universalism. So I recently became obsessed with one of the strangest jobs in professional football. It's called the Get Back Coach. Now, for the record, I watch and play the other football, soccer. So when I first walked by my partner who had the game on and witnessed this phenomenon, I had to do some research. For those who are also unfamiliar, some NFL teams employ a staff member whose sole responsibility is keeping the head coach from wandering too far onto the field during the game. Sean McVay of the Rams is especially known for this. In the intensity of the moment, he drifts farther and farther away from the sidelines. And the strength coach, Ted Rath, literally grabs him and pulls him back before he gets flattened by players moving at full speed. Now, it's one thing to try to explain this to you. It's a whole other thing to show you.
Coaches, whether it's, a position coach or even Sean McVay now, I literally have to spend most of my time while the offense is on the field standing right behind Sean and ripping him out of the way when the official's about to run into him just so we don't get a penalty. There is an art to it. It is kind of like a dance. Maybe tango, like a sidestep into the path of the official and then remove back.
Reverend Sarah's essay reminded me of the Get Back coaching we just witnessed, because ministry right now can feel exactly like that, becoming each other's Get Back coaches, pulling one another back from the edge of despair, keeping each other from being swallowed whole by systems designed to destroy, refusing to let people stand alone on the field while the collisions keep coming. The stakes are moving fast. Adrenaline is high. People are getting hurt. And many of us keep finding ourselves being pulled further and further towards the center of danger. For context, I live in the South. I was born and raised there. Currently, I reside in Austin, Texas. And yes, we do have the best barbecue in the country. I said it. And yes, we do have equally, if not more, delicious options for vegans and vegetarians. Don't get me started about the plethora of options available from our food trucks. So because of this context, I know how dangerous it is to flatten this moment into simple maps of safe states and unsafe states, as though liberation can be charted so neatly. Safety, which only exists in varying measures, has never ever been evenly distributed in this country. For example, some of my friends who are BIPOC and trans live in the South precisely because this is where they feel the safest. That reality completely disrupts the narrative that safety automatically exists somewhere else in a blue state. Said friends tell me they are not primarily living in fear because they are surrounded by community, surrounded by people who know how to keep each other alive. They have been doing it for generations. And I think that is part of what the Get Back Coach metaphor reveals. Nobody survives the barrage of chaos alone. Somebody has to notice when you are drifting too far into danger. Somebody has to pull you back before impact. Somebody has to know your patterns well enough to intervene before you even realize how exposed you are. And that kind of closeness requires something many of us, especially those of us who are white, have been taught to resist. Interdependence. Not losing individuality, not erasing our differences, but living in a way where people genuinely take care of one another. Where needs are anticipated, where survival is collective, where many hands show up before anyone has the opportunity to beg for help or justify their need for it. And the South has always known how to organize under pressure, especially Black communities across the South who spent generations building systems of care in the face of violence, segregation, poverty, policing, and political hostility. Recently, the All Roads Lead to the South protest was a national day of action held on May 16th, 2026, and it focused on protecting voting rights and fair representation for marginalized communities. After a Supreme Court ruling weakened parts of the Voting Rights Act and allowed states to redraw congressional maps, thousands of activists, civil rights groups, and faith leaders gathered in Alabama to protest. Events began in Selma and ended with a large rally at the Alabama State Capitol in Montgomery, connecting today's movements to the historical civil rights struggle rooted in the South from the past. The history matters and it's clearly still relative. So much of what keeps queer and trans people alive now, mutual aid, chosen family, organizing networks, church basements, shared childcare, community defense, knowing who will answer the phone at 2 a.m., has deep roots in Black Southern survival traditions. States like Texas, Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina are home to a vast number of trans people, families, organizers, ministers, artists, caregivers, and communities building lives there every single day. And as I said earlier, I was born and raised in the South. This is my home, and nobody gets to take that away from me. In fact, I moved back to the South after living in the North because I realized that if I wanted things to change, I needed to help build that change where my people were already hurting. That was my path. Not everyone can or should follow it. And where I live in Austin, Texas, ministers, organizers, chaplains, and mutual aid networks help people in ways that are public, sure, and in far more ways that are not. That is what communities under pressure have always understood best. Black communities in the South understand it, queer communities understand it, trans communities understand it, and BIPOC trans Southerners have known it all along. We become each other's get back coaches and we get through, pulling one another back towards safety, back towards community, back towards ourselves, back towards the reminder that no system, no law, no governor, no court ruling gets to have the final word about our humanity. Because the government and what it says is not the truest thing in the room at any given time. This is why so many of us stay, and we do stay. Not because we are naive about the danger, not because we cannot see the wreckage coming, not because we mistake suffering for holiness, but because our people are here, and our whole hearts reside in those people. Beneath all the noise and cruelty of this moment, there is still another world moving underneath it all. A world where people keep caring each other. in church basements and living rooms, kitchen tables and hospital bedsides, in protest lines, shelters, whispered late-night phone calls, and hurried messages of action and signal. Through it all, I am proud to be UU, because Unitarian Universalism's commitment to trans folks is far more than words. It can be experienced through public witness, direct action, mutual aid, advocacy, and spiritual care. And right now, the UUA, together with the UUSC and Trust, are inviting UUs to mobilize in opposition to a proposed Department of Housing and Urban Development rule. This rule would strip protections from transgender people seeking safety in federally funded shelters and housing programs. And through the Pink Haven Coalition, UU communities are continuing their support of trans-led networks of safety and care. In my own program, The Woodlands creates an online space for trans people and their loved ones to gather each month for spiritual care, belonging, and restoration-centered community, one of the only programs of its kind in the country. These are just a few of the way our words have become deeds. You and I both know that there are countless more examples. That is ministry. Not certainty, not purity, not performance, not ego, but accompaniment. The sacred refusal to abandon one another in the middle of our deepest human hardships. The ongoing practice of recognizing each other's humanity. The bones deep knowledge that the South is our South. And that the people are all of us. And in times like these, that kind of certainty and love is not just merely compassionate. It is what is saving us. And that is why I'm proud to be UU alongside so many of you. Because our faith at its best is not merely something we believe, it is something we do. And when history asks what we did at this moment, when our most vulnerable were targeted, when fear was weaponized, when cruelty tried to pass itself off as policy, I pray it will be said, we did not look away, we did not abandon each other, we became each other's get-back coaches, pulling one another back towards life. Because no governor, no court, no law, no system gets the final word about our humanity. We do, and we will prove it through our love. Amen, and blessed be.
Thank you again to Sarah for her essay and to Jamie for their response. You've encouraged us, emboldened us, and loved us up so we can keep doing the work that needs to be done. And you've reminded us just how hard the work is and that there's care and support available for us. Dear colleague, please reach out if you are in need. Please. For those who are watching us online right now, we've pasted information in the chat on how to access these resources. For those here, please seek out chaplain support for one another. I'd like also at this time to thank Reverend Dr. Elizabeth Stevens for her service as a member of the Berry Street Executive Committee. Elizabeth, I know you are watching and it has been an honor to serve with you, and we release you with gratitude. And I get to welcome the Reverend Katie Romano Griffin as the newest member of the Executive Committee. She will serve a 3-year term alongside returning Executive Committee members Reverend Eric Cherry and Reverend Margalie Belazaire. And that's all. Oh yeah, there's something else you want to hear from me. It is my pleasure to announce that our 2027 Berry Street essayist will be the Reverend Mary Catherine Morn. And with that, I extinguish our chalice and call to a close the ministerial conference in Berry Street for 2026 and look forward to seeing you at next year's conference in San Jose. Go in peace.